about the threat from climate change. It's about how our economy fails to deliver for us all. The housing crisis means that generations have much less of a chance to secure a decent, affordable home. And actual home ownership is so far out of the sight of our children. Over 4 million children today live in poverty. 150,000 children will be living without a proper home at Christmas. It's utterly shameful. On Monday, Channel 4's Dispatches programme let families in poverty tell their own stories. And let's face it, they were heartbreaking. We heard from Cameron, visibly cold and pale, and like his sisters, wearing all his clothes indoors because of the cost of heating. And he told us how they try not to eat a lot in one day, even though most of us are really hungry. It's so cruel that any child has to face this. And it's so unfair that it's happening in a society with wealth such as ours. There are many, many more families like Cameron's. I meet them every day. They face hardship because of Tory policies. They're policies that continue to destroy our social housing. We will rebuild it with 100,000 more council homes a year by 2025. Their two-child policy means that Cameron's start in life will be damaged because he has two sisters, Caitlin and Casey, rather than just one. We'll end that. The housing payment cuts that have made living in huge swathes of our country, like mine, utterly unaffordable for families on low incomes, forcing many to make up the difference with food banks and leaving far less money to be able to spend on the basics for their children. The impact is so obvious in areas like mine, Newham, where 1 in every 12 children is now without a secure home. So we'll restore the link between housing support and local rents, and we'll do so much more. I can't tell you how proud I am to stand on this manifesto and to be the one to introduce John today, because he's the one who will lift children out of poverty and will change our country for the better. So I give you our next Chancellor of the Exchequer, John McDonnell.
Thank you. Thank you. Don't go. It's the best heckle I've had the whole campaign. Okay. On Monday night, I watched the Dispatches programme. It was called Growing Up Poor. If you haven't seen it, you should. Please do so. It portrays a starkly what nearly 10 years of austerity have resulted in for too many families in our country. It's the precarious existence so many of our families face in our society at the moment. It means that you just have to have all it takes, one mishap, an illness, a death, or a family breakdown, and families are just pushed over the edge. I found it intensely distressing. I still do, talking about it. It was watching one child. She showed us that they had no food in her home. She went through the cupboards, opening the cupboards just to show there was nothing there. There was another child, as Lynn said, going to bed in their clothes just to keep warm. And then there was a young girl who emptied her piggy bank to see if there was some money there for their mum to put some on the meter to boil the water for their hot water bottles. These are parents who are struggling with stress and mental health problems. And yet in the film you see the wonderful spirit of the children as they helped the marvellous but overstretched volunteers in the food bank, providing so many people with food. But the remarkable story of the programme, these were families living in wealthy towns. This one was Cambridge, a really wealthy town, but it displayed the divide that there is. That was Monday, and then on Tuesday, we had the shelter report that found, latest count, 135,000 children who will be without a home this Christmas, so living in temporary accommodation. And some of you may have seen the reports a few months ago of families living in containers. And yet at the same time, this is what I suppose shocks us all, is that at the same day, an analysis by the Equality Trust showed UK's sixth richest people controlling as much wealth as the poorest 13 million in our country. And it just all goes on to show just how unjust and how unequal our society is. It's 3 weeks to Christmas. Many will be celebrating the birth of Jesus. And yet children are going hungry and homeless in the 5th largest economy of the world. And it just all begs the question, doesn't it, really, to us all, are we really living up to the values of Christianity or any of the other religions or beliefs, for that matter, that we hold dear? I think it begs the question. And what dispatches showed was what happens when a family is forced to rely upon a safety net that in reality now barely exists. In the Labour Party, let's make it absolutely clear, we don't believe it's enough to offer people a handout or a hand up out of poverty. We want to abolish poverty once and for all within our society. That's why we've committed in our manifesto abolishing in-work poverty within 5 years. And it's why we're replacing a social mobility commission with a social justice committee. Because unlike the Tories, we don't believe in tolerating poverty just so long as a lucky few can escape. We want to abolish it for everybody. And I want to thank Lynn Brown for everything she's done in our Shadow Treasury team, taking responsibility and pushing this agenda forward so that we were clear in our manifesto what our objectives were. And they are radical, but they're achievable. They're achievable and realistic because of the commitment what we can show when we go into government and as a movement overall. The problem of steeply rising cost of living over the last 10 years isn't an issue just faced by a small number of us. It's also faced by the many within our country. It isn't just a small number of families that are hit by stagnant wages, rising bills, but the majority within our community. And Labour's published today a report that sets out the cost to most within our community of nearly 10 years of Conservative government, and the policies of privatisation of the successive Conservative governments way back to the 1980s. It goes all the way back to the Thatcher and major administrations, selling off our nation's public utilities, and yes, our natural assets. The family silver, a former Conservative Prime Minister called it. Profiteering through privatisation and the Conservatives' failure to curb rising bills has cost families nearly £6,000 a year since 2010. And while wages are still lower than before the financial crash, inaction and economic mismanagement by the Conservatives and Liberal Democrats over the last decade has meant the cost of living for most households has actually soared. So in our manifesto, our exciting manifesto launched 2 weeks ago, we've set out a plan for real change. And it's change that will help tackle that burden of rising living costs. How can we do it? Well, after nearly 10 years during what seemed impossible that anything might change, I'll just tell you where it starts. It starts with adopting, first of all, the principle of do no harm. At least don't make things worse. So we'll scrap universal credit. We'll scrap it. And we'll stop its rollout, and we'll put in place a package of fixes, of reforms, while we design the full reform, the replacement that will be fit for purpose to ensure people do not fall into poverty. Because that won't help everyone. We need to raise wages across the country so people don't need to rely upon universal credit in the future. And that starts with a real living wage. Yes, £10 an hour straight away for everyone over 16 will end the discrimination against low people within our pay system that exists at the moment for youngsters, often doing the same work but paid so much less. And that means an average pay rise of up to £6,000 a year, a pay rise for 7.5 million people. And for public sector workers who seem to have been penalised by this Conservative administration, we're looking for a boost of 5% in the first year of a Labour government. And for others, it's bringing in trade union bargaining across the economy to raise wages everywhere. And also ending bogus self-employment and investing across the UK in good, sustainable jobs in the industries of the future. We want a high-wage society, and it's the building block of our vision for the future, for a better, more inclusive economy. But higher wages are no good if the cost of living continues to race away. And the Tories and Liberals have said that they're opposed to public ownership. They're prepared to tell voters that those voters are wrong to want to control the essentials of our economy. And the Tories' ideological objections have real consequences. Our proposals to bring the major energy companies into public ownership has been independently estimated to save an average £142 a year, while our proposals to retrofit almost every home in the country would slash the average household bill by £400 a year. Getting rid of the dividends being paid out, the overpaid management and the financial speculators isn't just the right thing to do. It doesn't just return the essentials of life to people's hands. It will save you money as soon as Labour get into government and make it happen. So it's no wonder, is it really, that the privatisation fat cats are scaremongering at the moment with their legal threats and the bizarre figures that they're inventing about the costs of our proposals. But, you know, that's not the end of it. Because you've heard the Tories and Liberal Democrats over recent weeks telling you that the essentials of life can't be provided free at the point of use or paid through taxation. And we're told we're dreamers if we think otherwise. These are the same people whose political ancestors would have laughed at the idea of free healthcare or free roads or free education, and they did. And now they're telling you that you can't possibly afford free social care or prescriptions or childcare. Well, of course, these things need to be paid for. In the Labour Party, we know that. It's our members and supporters who provide the care, who look after the young people, and who dispense those prescriptions. Of course they need paying for. And we believe a fair society, if we believe in a fair society, we don't leave all of this to the market so that those with the most can afford them while others can't. And that's why Labour has a fair approach to tax. Yes, raising income tax rate for the top 5%, while we're closing loopholes and taxing income from wealth, the same as that from work. And what a difference that could make. Paying for free childcare, saving on average almost £3,000 a year per child. Providing free school meals for all primary school children, saving parents over £500, and making sure all our children have a decent meal each day. And again, it's We should never ever see in our society again a child struggling at school because of hunger. And yes, it means paying for the personal care that we or our family members might need in old age. If you or someone in your family needs care at home, that could mean a saving of over £7,000 a year. Yes, and paying for a reduction in rail fares to keep the cost of living down and encourage more people onto public transport to help us tackle climate change. And yes, paying for free prescriptions, saving those with monthly prescriptions over £100 a year. We estimate that, just looking at some of our policies, Labour's plan for real change could save families over £6,700 a year. And that's before we're talking about righting the injustice done to the women born in the 1950s, the WASPy women who we will stand by when we go into government, when others promised and then negate from that promise. These are all, and you know, what was amazing was that the Tories told us that this couldn't be afforded. Yet they were perfectly capable of handing out billions in tax cuts to the rich and corporations, now amounting to £100 billion. Labour's plan to transform our society, to create a society based on reducing costs and raising wages, is by working together. And they're based upon laying the foundations of a new economy. The scale of the reforms we pledged to introduce, yes, is significant, because the challenges we face are so significant. And the question asked of us is whether the level of change we aspire to is achievable, realistic. And nearly 10 years of Conservative and Lib Dem governments imposing austerity on our society, yes, has limited some people's ambitions for the future of our country. And it's understandable that confidence in a potential for a better future has been damaged by a Conservative political narrative that has undermined the hope that change can be brought about. And that's why, for those of us who believe that real change is not only necessary but readily achievable, we need to spell out in detail how concretely, step by step, that change can be brought about. And we've done that through our manifesto and the costing of the manifesto in our grey book. And I'll be saying more about that in the days ahead before the election itself, so that before polling day, people will know not just what we want to achieve, but just how we're going to achieve it. This election campaign began for me in Liverpool, in the city of my birth. Only last week, the people of that city were forced to relive again the trauma of the Hillsborough disaster. The memory of a previous Conservative government came back, how it treated the North, the Midlands, Wales and Scotland, football fans and the working class people all together. I remember Hillsborough, I remember the tragedy like it was yesterday. I remember the brave campaigners who've fought for justice ever since. And actually, I also remember how my closest of friends, Jeremy Corbyn, one of the bravest politicians, stood up for them, stood for the fight for justice that was denied them. Those killed and then lied about at Hillsborough, lied about and abused, including by the present Prime Minister in his days as a journalist. People need to remember what the Conservatives have done to us over the decades. Those who had their communities deliberately smashed apart by the Conservative Party and were lied about, like during the miners' strike. Over the years, I've worked with Jeremy, and at all times, he's taken a stand. Every time he's taken a stand on a principled issue, he's been denounced. And then not every time afterwards, he's been proved right. And I've seen one thing consistently: the way he supports others to turn their hopes into reality. And we're seeing that now with the rising stars of the Shadow Cabinet, the future leaders of our country too. And giving power to others is at the heart of the society we'll start to forge in a week's time. Some have said we're too ambitious, that there's no way we can achieve everything we're promising. Do you know, they may have forgotten or not even heard about the Attlee government, which after the Second World War, when this country was virtually bankrupt, took control of our economy, brought key utilities into public ownership, created the NHS and the welfare state and free education. Well, they also said Jeremy Corbyn couldn't be leader of the Labour Party. They said we'd be annihilated in the 2017 election. They say there's no alternative. They say, or at least the Prime Minister does, and I quote, that the working class are drunk, criminal and feckless, a direct quote. So it's hardly surprising they don't want to see power put in the people's hands, away from the bankers who fund the Tory party, that they mock the intelligence or capability of ordinary people to run things. And beneath the short-sighted Brexit bluster, it's the same old message from the Tories. Nothing can change. Nothing will change. A better world isn't possible. Well, we know that's not true. Things can and will change. And we're ready to make that change with a fully worked out programme to give everyone control over the decisions that affect their lives, not just the lucky few. So the next week is decisive. On December the 13th, we can wake up to years more of Brexit chaos, of Donald Trump dictating the terms of our trading future, while our economy, to quote the IFS, has austerity baked in and sees public services sink even further into neglect. Or we can start the task of putting right the mistakes of the past, rebuilding Britain from the bottom up. That will only happen under a Labour government. And all of us here today, I know, will give everything we've got in the coming days to make that happen. For those families whose children will have their dinner from the food bank and who are homeless and have no permanent secure home over their heads on Christmas Day. We're going to give them a Christmas present that will transform their lives. And that Christmas present will be a Labour government. Solidarity.
Absolutely brilliant. So, some of you don't know me. I've spent my first years in Parliament in the Whip's office. I will be a very strict chair, okay? We are not like Boris Johnson. We are not avoiding scrutiny. And we believe in a free press. Even if some question is hostile or we don't agree with what a media outlet has chosen to do during this election campaign, the journalist will be heard and will be heard with respect. There is no question that John can't answer. We will not be booing. It is not our politics, and I will not tolerate it. Okay? Good. So first of all, we're going to take some questions from the press who are here today. I'm not going to be able to see you because of the lights. So if you could stand up, tell us who you are and where you're from.
Jason Farrell, Sky News.
Hello.
Is the President of the United States lying when he says that the NHS isn't on the table in trade talks?
Okay, all the evidence that we've seen has demonstrated objectively that it is. But Donald Trump has a passing relationship with reality and truth sometimes. and I believe in one instance claimed he didn't know what the initials NHS stood for. So the reality is the evidence is there, and the anxiety that we have about the NHS under a Boris Johnson regime and his relationship with Trump causes us extreme concern. And that's why, let's make it clear, after the election next week under a Labour government, the NHS is not for sale.
Hi, John. Mikey Smith from The Mirror. The manifesto largely insulates sort of middle earners from tax rises. Do you think that's fair and sustainable? And also, if I may, Donald Trump also said that Jeremy Corbyn would find him very easy to work with. Do you look forward to cultivating that relationship?
It's encouraging to know that we can maintain a good working relationship with the people of America in the future, after possibly another election. Anyway, Jeremy will work with leaders all over the world, including Donald Trump, and we'll ensure that whatever happens in the future, we'll look after the interests of our own people as well as those across the globe. We'll always want to secure global cooperation, particularly around securing peace and stability for the world. We'll work with whoever to do that. With regard to the issue around taxation, we've set out our proposals. We believe that our tax proposals introduce a fair taxation system. The reason that we are trying to limit the impact upon wider society is because, exactly as we've said today, middle earners as well as low-income earners have suffered as well, and they've been hit pretty hard as a result of rising cost of living, and a lot of that is directly as a result of government policy. What we're trying to do is introduce a fair taxation system. It does mean that those with the broader shoulders should pay more and bear the bigger burden, but it does also mean, let's be clear, corporations and the rich will pay their taxes. And that means we're introducing a comprehensive enforcement and transparency program for taxation, which will enable us to tackle the large scale, and some would argue industrial scale, tax avoidance that goes on within our society. You know, and I say time and time again, in the last election, and people have heard this from before, in the last election, I was accused of having a magic money tree, and it's extraordinary that the Tories have now got a magic money forest in their hands at the moment. But I tell you, if there is a magic money tree, it is in the Cayman Islands, and we are going to dig it up, and we're going to bring it back here. Libby.
Libby Wiener, ITV News. Most people think that Santa Claus is make-believe. Aren't your plans to give families $6,500 also make-believe?
Yeah, that's why we've set out in detail exactly where that will come from. But let's be clear, it will require an economy that is working for everybody. And that's the whole process of bringing our utilities, some of our utilities, back into public ownership, because we believe they can be better managed, but also by just stopping the dividends and the rip-offs that have gone on, we believe we can produce a reduction in bills for people. None of this is rocket science. It's basic, very common sense economics. And if you look at the proposals we've put forward, each of them detailed research and objectively assessed. In that way, this is not about Father Christmas or make-believe. This is about hard-nosed economic policy making. And in the Labour Party, at times, I'm accused of being the bureaucrat. Yes, I am. I take that as a badge of honour. I believe that everything we do has got to be almost tested to destruction for when we go into government and make sure it's completely implementable. And that's what we've done. And we've done it over time, and we've done it in meetings like this. So our manifesto is grassroots up written, and then it was tested against the experts working in the front line, as well as those who are involved in the detailed research around these matters. So this is a readily implementable, achievable program. And the issue we're trying to get across today is that nearly 10 years of austerity has narrowed people's ambitions, undermined their confidence in what's achievable. And we mustn't be held back by this almost self-limitation that's imposed upon us by those who still control wealth and power in this country and don't want to see even the level of redistribution we're seeking here to ensure that we have a growing economy in which there are fair wages, in which people get decent public services. And yes, we never, ever have another program like that dispatches program on poor children ever again.
Hi there, I'm Coletta Smith from the BBC. You say that within the next few days you're going to give more detail on how your policies will be funded, that you'll flesh that out in the next few days. With a week to go until the election, is that putting too much information late in the campaign, hoping that people will believe your promises without the costings there?
No, we've already done that. Sorry, you've misunderstood me. We've already put the costings out there. The manifesto is fully costed. We published the grey book. Look at the grey book. It's a detailed costing of all that we're doing. And we set out there the costing, the funding source. And if you look in the detail of that, I was the first Shadow Chancellor ever to do it. I did it in the last election, I've done it in this. Compare that to the threadbare notes that we got from the Conservative Party. But also what I was referring to is over the next few days as well, just as we've done for each policy, I'll be putting that together and people will see what the first 100 days of a Labour government will look like. And you'll see what we intend in terms of our first Queen's speech, and you'll see also some of the details of our first budget. Obviously, what we're doing now is we're meeting with the civil servants in what they call the access talks, prepare the ground for when we go into government on December the 13th. We want to hit the deck running. Why do we want to do that? Because the problems that we face are so severe as a country, and that the suffering, human suffering that's going on within our society is unacceptable. So we want, as we go into government, we want to make sure our programme is implemented rapidly and effectively. And that's some of the more of the detail that we'll give. The most important thing, though, is to recognise that, as I said earlier, our manifesto was written from the grassroots up. Lynn and I and the Treasury team, every other Saturday, we've been touring around the country for the last couple of years. We've been holding meetings in towns and villages and cities as well, talking about what are the needs in their particular area, what has to be done to transform their lives and their local economy. And we've gone along, yes, with a menu of some of our policies to see whether they'd work in that particular area. And people have said yes or no, but how about these other ideas? So ideas have emerged that we've now built up into manifesto. That's where free broadband came from. Free broadband came from towns that we visited that were saying, we're being held back, we can't get the investment because the speed of our broadband here is pathetic. And so we said, what is needed? That's where our railway investment programme came from. Individual lines were identified, so this could release the potential of this particular town, this region, with this levels of investment. And that's what we've done. So all of those policies are there. But now in this next few days, what we need to ensure is that people know just how in phasing that will be done. It's an exciting period, but it's important that we communicate our policies, and that's what we've done, but it's also important that we're ready for the implementation as rapidly as we possibly can, because the need is so severe, and that includes the existential threat that we face in terms of climate change as well. We can't wait. We can't wait to get into government, but we can't wait for the implementation of those policies because they're so desperately needed. Thanks.
Thanks. Hi, John. Kate Ferguson at The Sun. How concerned are you that Brexit-backing Labour voters are deserting the party? Sorry, that Brexit-backing Labour voters are deserting the party and switching to the Tories. And what have you done with Remainers? Have you banned them from being on air? Where's Keir Starmer this election campaign?
Campaigning all around the country alongside me and all the others, and others effectively as well. What's happened in terms of those who are seen as Labour leavers, who voted Leave It is interesting, really, because what we've been trying to do is make sure everyone is aware of our policy, so that, as we've said, what we want to do is make sure that we negotiate with the European Union partners a credible and sensible leave deal, that then goes back to the people. So those people who still wish to see Britain leave have a sensible leave option to vote for, but then also people have the option of remain. And the key thing for us is let the people decide. Let them make the decision, and then when they make that decision, we'll implement it. It's interesting as well, you know, Boris Johnson called this election on the basis that the only question that should be asked is about Brexit. And it's interesting, people are saying, yes, it is an important question, it needs to be resolved. But there are other questions as well. There are other questions about why can't I get access to a GP? Why there are record waiting times at NHS hospitals? why are there children in our society going hungry? Why did 700 people, homeless people, die on our streets last year? Why are wages still below the level of 2008-9? Why are our public services on the state that they are? And you know, the ultimate conclusion they're making is because we've had nearly 10 years of a Tory government implementing austerity unnecessarily on us, holding back our economy, holding back our country. And we need change, but it's got to be real change, and that's what we've set out.
Anyone else?
Hi, Daniel Martin from the Daily Mail. Do you support the RMT in holding 27 days of strike action on South Western Railway?
We're urging everyone to get back round the table and negotiate. What I support the RMT on is ensuring that they have a safety critical officer, member of staff on each train, because in my constituency we've had real problems with safety overall. So I'm hoping that the management and union will get round the table, they can resolve that matter, because for the travelling public the key issue is safety, and that's what this will address.
Any more? Any more? So if I've missed you, it's an accident. Good. Anybody else like to ask a question? We have a gentleman there.
I'm Kevin McMahon from West Bromwich East constituency. Mr McDonnell, like many in the room, I think welcomed the immediate scrapping of universal credit. But given that the civil service is the same, the bureaucracy is the same, the administration, how are we going to avoid delayed payments and administrative problems that the media are just going to highlight and try and destroy us for?
Yeah, that's a good question. We've put forward a sort of emergency programme straight away, and addressing some of the issues that Lynn raised as well. You know, getting rid of the two-child limit is, I think, extremely important. It's brutal and discriminatory. Getting rid of the bedroom tax, reducing that 5-week waiting time. All of those emergency measures we can get in place pretty quickly. Naturally, the people we're talking to on the Access talks to the civil servants about how quickly we can do this. But also remember, we've got links with PCS, the Civil Service Union, and they, as workers working in the Department of Work and Pensions, are coming forward with their ideas about how swiftly these reforms can be brought out. And we've had a long discussion with all the different agencies, but also the different representative groups within this field as well, about how we can step by step introduce the reforms and then look for the real safety net approach. That's the first thing. So I think that I think it will be challenging, but again, nothing that we can't overcome. And when I say challenging, I mean it's the speed of travel that we've got to get. And I think we can, the emergency package we can get in quickly. Then after that, we've got to really, I think, seize the initiative. But remember, the other thing as well, we've got to try and ensure that we have a society where people aren't dependent on that social security safety net. So that does mean a commitment to full employment. But it means we've got to end the type of economy that's being created at the moment, which is low pay, long hours, insecure work. And we can address that very quickly as well. Insecure work, we can scrap zero-hour contracts, full stop. You know, tackling low pay by having a real living wage, absolutely critical. But we want to restore sectoral collective bargaining. And basically, 25 years ago, about 80% of us had our wages determined as a result of sectoral collective bargaining. And it was undermined as a result of some of the undermining of trade union rights. And as a result of that, you can almost see the graph where wages then start stagnating or being held back. So the restoration of sectoral collective bargaining, I think, will ensure a greater element of wage justice within our society too. So in that sort of holistic approach, we can tackle poverty, but then we can start ensuring that the safety net itself never allows anyone to fall through again. One other group that Lynn has mentioned in the past as well is we've got to look at the people who've been hit hardest as well. It's children, but it's also disabled people too. Disabled people over the last 9 years have been treated with a brutality, I think, that we've never seen before for a long time in our society. And it comes to when a UN rapporteur comes to this country and produces a report and refers to the systematic abuse of the human rights of disabled people. Or another UN rapporteur comes here and talks about destitution, not just poverty, destitution. So there's issues, again, with focusing on disabled people that we can assist people greatly. Scrapping the work capability assessment once and for all, I think, would be one of those things because of the trial that put through. Can I say the other issue as well for us that we've been working on is obviously the issue of free personal social care, which is absolutely critical to sustain so many people. And again, we've put it in the manifesto, it's fully costed in the Grey Book, and the implementation of that will be speedy, and I think it will produce a remarkable turnaround in the quality of many older people's lives as well.
Yeah. Sister there with the stripy. Yes.
My name's Josie Kelly and I live in the Worley constituency. And my question is about the WASPI women and particularly the announcement the other day about the compensation package. But I wondered why in the manifesto it wasn't more, it wasn't articulated much more forcibly, shall we say. And it didn't seem to be actually costed in the way that you pronounced on the package later. So could you perhaps explain for me, because that's a question I have been asked about, and I'd like to hear your views on why it wasn't so prominent in the manifesto. Thank you.
Number of reasons. One, in the manifesto we put specifically that the commitment that we'd bring forward a scheme, and that's what we did. We've been working on the scheme for 18 months now, and it was a matter of timing, and I wanted to time it in a way where it got the fullest attention possible. And doing it on the manifesto day itself, I think it would have been swamped by other issues. That's part of the reason for it. But also, there was an element whereby we also wanted to take a lot of people with us. So there's a lot of conversations going on to prepare the ground for that happening. So when we produced it, we wanted to ensure everyone had the details of the scheme, and then also they could go on the website and to the calculator. But also, we wanted to make sure everyone understood the total package of expenditure that is required and how that would be done. Doing it on the manifesto day, I think, would have had it swamped by other things, and I wanted a specific day in which all attention was focused on that, so people got all the information that they wanted. And it was a matter of making sure all our experts were talking to everyone in advance of that announcement itself, and they were fully briefed, and that took a lot of effort. And it was all done by volunteers. It was terrific, the work it was done. But we had to be straight with people as well. You know, it's a large amount of money. We're talking about 58 billion pounds, and but we were trying to explain to people that, you know, if the government had lost in court as it did on the bedroom tax or as it did on the lung conditions, it would have had to been paid for as a contingency anyway. The money will be paid over 5 years, and it'll be raised over five years as well. And when I've sat down with the number of the WASPI women's groups and others and said this is a lot of money, and quite rightfully said, well, you know, this government has just given away 100 billion to the rich and the corporations, and when the banks were floundering, you know, people were finding hundreds of billions, let alone 57, 58 billion. So it was putting it in that context itself. There's a sense of urgency about this as well. I wanted a simple scheme that we could introduce quickly because there's a large number of women who are older and some who have various conditions, and there's a lot of ill health. So therefore it needs to speedily get the money to them. But then also there's a lot of older women involved, obviously, that they feel that their quality of life has been damaged. There's some women who have been forced into penury, real poverty. And there's others who'd planned their lives, retirement, you know, being able to take their grandchildren to school or pick them up and things like that. That quality of life has gone. So we wanted a scheme that was simple, straightforward, and readily implementable. And that's what it is. And to be honest, I'm proud of it. I'm actually proud of it. I think it's something worth doing and done.
Who else? Sister at the front.
Hi, Teresa Bellis, Meriden. John, I keep hearing the Tories say that they're the party of opportunities, but it strikes me that opportunities, when the Tories talk about it, carries a very hefty price tag. And I'd like you to talk about what the party's going to be doing for young people, particularly our very young children, right up to our students.
Yeah. I think the next Labour government under Jeremy Corbyn, I think it will go down in history for its founding of the National Education Service. Just as the Attlee government under Bevan and Attlee and others are famous for founding the NHS, I think this one will be famous for founding the National Education Service. So, you know, right through from the free childcare to properly funded primary and secondary schools, refunding and rebuilding further education, which has almost been demolished under this last 9 years of austerity. For some reason, when we desperately needed the skills, further education seems to have been targeted by this government for cuts. And then also making sure in higher education, this commitment that, you know, when someone, you know, youngsters who do everything asked them, they stay on at school, they get their A-level results, they go to university, and then they come out with £55,000 worth of debt. You know, the reason we're scrapping tuition fees is because we have a belief, I've said this time and time again, we have a belief that education isn't a commodity to be bought and sold. It's a gift from one generation to another that we all benefit from. And that's why we will scrap tuition fees. We're looking to see how we can assist with existing debt. What's interesting, Jeremy and I and others, we voted against tuition fees introduction. And I did it on the basis, in principle, I opposed it, but also the system was always going to fail. And a large amount of the debt, even under this government, is having to be written off because it's never going to be paid. So it's a system that's imploding in itself, and that we'll have to address in government. And that's what the options we're looking at that now. But it's one of those things you need the real detail of the work done in government to a large extent. To look at the range of measures, how we can address that. But I think in terms of the National Education Service, it will transform people's lives, you know. In terms of, you know, for my generation, you know, all those foundation stones laid by that Attlee government and then other Labour governments subsequently built upon them did give us, you know, put a decent roof over our heads in our council housing and gave us free education, gave us opportunities other generations never had. And then also gave us the opportunity of rewarding work and decent pay and with rights at work. It's that sort of society we're going to create for the future. And I think for those young people, it gives them the security that they can then unleash their talents and ambition. And that at the moment, you feel they're being held back rather than allowed to develop in that way. It's interesting, the number of young people that are involved in our campaign and our party now, and the levels of support that we've got is absolutely terrific. And I think next week, I think they'll surprise us again on the basis of the young people coming out now and voting. And I just say to the young people that I've been meeting all the time, next week will determine their future. It will determine their individual futures, but actually it'll determine their future as well, because our young people now, they're the ones who've taught us about climate change. That's why I supported the school strikes, because actually those young people taking action in that way forced us to start paying attention to this existential threat. So that Labour government is absolutely key. These are the years when it's make or break whether or not we are going to succeed in tackling climate change. And that's the danger of a Boris Johnson government, which actually is backed by fossil fuel funders and at the same time adheres to fossil fuel psychology and the basic development of a carbon economy. That's got to come to an end, and we've set out our detailed plans for a green industrial revolution that enable it to happen. I'm having a Theresa May moment here if I'm not careful. Yeah. Watch this.
I'm really sorry. I know that so many more of you wanted to ask some questions, but we do have to wrap it up. Can I say you've all been absolutely brilliant. I'll come back to Birmingham again. Thank you so very much. Let's work hard.
Thank you.